Hello everyone, welcome to the video on smart dictionaries. As we discussed in the previous videos, there are different ways to use dictionary technologies. This video is going to cover an implementation that I've been a part of that makes use of a language model for Plains Cree. This website is called Itwewina, and you can find it at itwewina.altlab.app. That's itwewina.altlab.app. And I will put the link to this on our webpage, and we will also get it sent to everybody through email. So this is a smart dictionary, and what that means is that there's an underlying language model that is able to work with our lookups and generations for words in a unique way. I think a good place to start is the home page. So first we have a little introductory welcome message telling you what you're looking at. To the top right, we have the option to change our website letters to either the SRO or syllabics. The SRO has two different forms, the ones with the circumflex, which is the little hat, and the ones with the macrons, which are the little bars. Let's take a look at what happens when we click syllabics. So we can see this little bit doesn't change, and that's because this is in English. It would be sort of weird to write all of that in English. But you'll see the Cree words change. So if we go back to the SRO, this word, for example, changes into syllabics. The welcome message here, Tanse, also does. The title of the dictionary, Itwewina, also changed into syllabics. And the title bar here is as well. Let's stick with the SRO for the rest of this video. Next, we have our search bar. Search bar here says search in Cree or English. And what that means is that we can type either an English word or a Cree word, and the system will figure out what language we are writing in. In the previous video, we saw that when we wrote in SRO without specifically telling the website, hey, we're going to be searching for this word and this word is in Cree, it would not work. If it assumed that it was English, it would try to find it in its English dictionary, and of course, it wouldn't find a Cree word in its English dictionary. Here, however, we can look for something like dog, and you'll see I don't even have to click return, it just auto returns. Or I can look for a Tim, and it will come up with results regardless. Let's take a look at the form cat. So here I'm entering in an English word, and I'm hoping to get Cree versions of the word cat. Here we have our main results page. These are the different entries that it thinks have something to do with cat. So our top one is posio, which I believe is actually a Cree version of the English word pussycat, but we also have another option, minos, which is one that I'm more familiar with. Beside every entry, we have this little circle button that has an eye in it, and if we hover over that, you don't have to click, you just hover over it with your cursor, you can see a little info card pops up. In bold, we have the stem, which is posio, and it says that this is a naming word, like asagan, ino, or Moskwa, and that there's only one of them. This info card is telling you that the part of speech is something that names a person or a animal or a entity, and that this is the singular form. It's just doing so in slightly less linguistic language. You can see too that it has this like asagan, ino, or Moskwa, and the idea here is that it's telling you that this is an animate form without actually using the terms animate. This was suggested to us after presenting it to language teachers. They suggested, a lot of students at least the ones who aren't in formal classes, aren't really learning the term animate or inanimate, or they may not be as familiar with that. Although if everybody here has different experiences, please let me know. But yeah, the idea here is that we are able to tell you the ways that the word behaves, what sort of plural markers it has, without necessarily using linguistic baggage that comes from, let's say, a European naming convention. You'll also notice a little speaker button here. And this, if I were to play it, would present a spoken version of the sound. As this is a recording, and I'm already recording on my microphone, that's what's going to be picking up is me speaking. So I won't click on it, but I invite everybody to actually go through and play around with this website and click and see what sounds you hear. We'll be talking a bit more about this on Thursday as well. You'll see as well below we have a little emoji and another like, and in this case it's saying kitsuokni or ayapi, again telling you how it behaves, words that it behaves like. The little emoji is meant to indicate that this is a animate noun or a noun that refers to a living thing. If we were to search up a word like house, you'll notice it has a little raindrop to indicate that it is not a living being. Let's go back to cat, though. We're going to go through now and click on the underlined word, and that will bring us to the full entry for the word. Here we have a little bit more information. So we have the definition from the Cree Words Dictionary, which is just cat. We also have the form that is a single, so posio, like we said before. The multiple version of this, the plural, would be posioak. The obviative, which here is labeled as further. If anybody has a better term for this, we would love to know. It's actually hard to talk about the obviative without using that term. But it's the secondary third person in a discourse, and that would be posiwa. Then we have a small, lesser, or young, so like little, and that's posis. And then we have a little table that tells you how possession works. So if it was your cat, we have here ni posio. We can also click show more, and that'll show additional forms. So it'll show, for example, if you wanted to know how to say like my multiple cats, or I have multiple cats, ni posiwak would be my cats. And that was not actually available previously. You'll also notice these gray squares, and these represent impossible forms. So you'll notice for this his or her possession, you can't say his or her one cat. You have to have this obviative form, or this further form, oposiwa. That's just something the language doesn't allow. It always has to be in this particular form. So the grayed out means impossible forms. Let's take a look now at a word that is an action, something like a verb. So I'm going to write, he runs. So again, here we have a long list. You can see we have the information card. So if I go like that, it pops up. Here we're given the stem of the verb. We're given that it is an action word, like mitso, which is he or she eats, or nipao, which is he or she sleeps. We write that it's a ni keyword, which is something Cree internal. We won't really talk about it right now. And we say that this is the form that is he or she is doing it. This pimbatao is he or she runs. And you can see the definitions there. We have one from the Musqueam Dictionary, which is he runs, and then from the Cree Words Dictionary, it is she or he runs. The emoji here is a person and an arrow, and that's to indicate that the action is intransitive, so it involves a person doing an action, but not necessarily something that is receiving the action. And again, it says it's like the verb nipao. So if you know how nipao conjugates, you should know how bimpatao conjugates as well. Also, you'll notice that if you hover over this, you get another info card that comes up, and it says it's a vowel final animate intransitive verb, or VAI-1. That's, if you're very familiar with the technical coding of these in the Cree Words Dictionary, this can be useful. Otherwise, it's probably not that much more illuminating. So let's look at an entry for a verb. Here we see the full entry. You can see we have more forms, and what you'll notice is that some of these forms are bolded, and some of them are not. The bolded forms are those that we have had explicit instruction from native speakers that has said, we know that this is a real word. That means either we've observed it in a recording from a native speaker, or we've had a native speaker say to us, yes, that is a proper word. All of the non-bolded forms are automatically generated. As we discussed previously, in a lot of languages, particularly those in North America, these verbal paradigms can get really, really big. If you want to talk about all possible forms, these things can get into the millions. And obviously, we're not going to be able to record or even observe every single possible form of every single possible verb. So instead, what we do is we automatically generate these. You'll see if I click the Show More form, we start getting a lot more forms. And granted, this is not the entire paradigm. If I click Show More again, you can see we get even more forms. So I'll click Show Less and we'll go back here. Now let's take a look at a word like he sees. In Cree, this is something like wapameo. Now you'll notice here, I didn't use the A with a circumflex or the E with a circumflex, and yet the system was able to use spell relax to match the characters regardless. So we get a result for he sees him, he or she sees somebody, and he or she sees him or her. And these are different dictionary definitions. You'll also notice that in the description here, there are two emoji people with an arrow pointing in the middle. And this is to indicate that an animate or living being is doing something to another animate or living being. And we say that it follows the pattern that we saw in Witseheo. So let's go to the full entry, and it's very similar to what we saw before. You can see we have more bold forms, but once I click Show More, you'll notice this gets a lot longer. So again, it's pretty obvious that we couldn't record every single one of these forms. So right now, all we have is our hand-recorded versions of these words. If we want sound for every single one of them, we're going to have to use a speech synthesis system, which I'll talk a bit about later. We have a system set up that does this, but we need to integrate it with the dictionary, and there's some tricky bits that we will cover when we talk about speech synthesis systems. If I hover over the definition, we would have gotten something like it is a transitive animate verb, class 1 regular. Otherwise, it's very similar to the other forms that we saw for he runs. Let's look up something a bit more complex, though. So let's say that I went to this website, the Cree Literacy Network, and I was reading a story from Solomon Rat. And in it, I saw this word right here. So I could copy this, go back to our dictionary, and paste it directly in the search bar, and then paste it directly into the and it gives us our results. The previous words that I showed you were all the basic forms. They were just the verb. They didn't have any of these extra preverbs. This one does, though, so it has ka and ki. And what this tells us, if we hover over the information, the I circles, is that ka is a preverb, can define a changed conjunct. It's often a relative clause. And ki is the past tense or completion. And it's able to figure out that the base verb is this one here that means she or he is a child. So now if I go back to the story, what I can see is that it starts with when I was a child. So that matches. Let's take a little bit more complicated word, though. So this one, if we go back to our dictionary and paste it into the search bar here, we see that it is a form. The base form is something like he or she reads, and it has ki, which again is past tense, and it has nitdoe, which means to go and to be engaged in. Now, if I hover over the circle for this full form, we're given information that tells us who's doing the action. So it's an action word like mitso, it's a ni keyword, and it is I who is doing it. So we could put this all together to mean it's I, it's reading, and it's doing so in the past, and it's going to do it. So something like I went and read. And if we click on the paradigms here, we can see the I form is very similar to what we pasted in, but it doesn't have the preverbs. And it has a T joining the things. We have a system that can take relaxed spelling. It doesn't need the exact right macrons. It can break up a verb into its constituent parts. It can figure out what the base verb is, can figure out what the preverbs are, it can figure out what the actor or who's doing the action is. So what else can we do? Well, what we can do is look for just preverbs. So let's say we knew what the rest of things meant, but we saw something like pay. We didn't know what pay meant, but we saw it in a word, and we knew it was a preverb. We can just search up pay, and it'll say come and, towards, approaching, hither, thence. If we look up just nitdoe from the previous example, we see the same thing. We also see similar words that have this constituent in it, but this is what we are given when we search up nitdoe. What I'm about to show you now is something that is a bit more experimental. We haven't completely implemented it yet, so I'm going to use a special search term here. I'm going to look up Ninnipan Auto 1. So what this does is that it gives an automatic translation for the form that we looked up. So rather than having to put things together like we did with the verb for reading, this gives us a translation. And the way that it does it is it recognizes that Ninnipan is a first-person singular form of nippa, which is to sleep. It also knows that in English, the first-person singular is I, and it doesn't add anything to the verb, so it can create I sleep as the translation. It's a really basic form of machine translation. If I turn this off, you can see we get this, which doesn't have the translation at all, but if we put it back like that, we get the translation. And this is all done on the fly. So this is done with computational models rather than listing out every possible option. Now let's say that I do it with that complex example that we had before. We can see that it doesn't quite work. We've only implemented it for simple verbs. But the hope is that once we get to developing it a bit more, we will be able to actually implement this for everything. The auto tag that's beside these just means that a native speaker hasn't quite looked at them, but this is what our system thinks it should mean. But, native speakers are better than computers, so listen to a native speaker if they disagree. The last thing I'm going to show you is a way that we give results based on the meanings of words, not just the spelling. The idea here is that we built a model that says, based on the English definitions of words in the Cree Words Dictionary by Eric Wolvengray, based on those definitions, what other words are similar. So one way that we can show this is if we look up the word cell phone, we get words telephone, phone, phone, telephone, he or she phones him. Now notice none of these words have the single word cell phone in them, but our language model recognizes that phones and cell phones are related. Interestingly, it also gives us the word for BlackBerry, which, of course, at least historically, was a very popular cell phone brand. Because this is making use of English definitions, it's going to have some things like this, where an English BlackBerry might mean a particular type of cell phone. It may have even been used as a synonym for cell phone like 15 years ago. But in Cree, I'm not really sure if it would. If you could say less for the actual like BlackBerry device, great, let me know. If not, know that although that is somewhat of a limitation, most users aren't going to see cell phone and think, the thing that says BlackBerry must be the result that I'm looking for. And know that we are using the English definitions because we tried this with just Cree definitions, so Cree to Cree, no English involved, and it just didn't work because as of right now, there weren't as many written resources to create these language models. So that is, in a nutshell, Itwewina. There are probably more secrets, but these are the basic functions. It's a great tool for looking words up. It's a great alternative to the online Cree dictionary. That's a little bit smarter. We built off of a lot of the lessons learned. And we worked with Mesk and Eric Wolvengray to build this the best way that we could. We're also really excited to get input. At the bottom of the page, there's a Contact Us button. If you have anything, if you find a definition you disagree with, if you have a word you want, click that, enter it in, send it off to us. This is a user-first dictionary. Also worth noting is that we built this technology from the ground up with the hopes that what we can do is plug in any language model that we have. It has to be of a particular type, but it can be of any language. And then we can create one of these dictionaries fairly quickly. The work is really done in this language modeling aspect. So we have one for Tsuut'ina. I believe we have one for Haida, Northern Haida. But the idea is that this will, going forward, be something anyone who has a language model for an Indigenous language of Canada can plug in and get all of these functionalities. So thanks for watching. As always, send me any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I hope you have a good night.